The USA has had one of the greatest economies that has ever been created. Coming from nothing at the start of the 20th century, America was able to get past its dysfunctional financial system, its labor conflicts, and its greed-fueled politics, and unite together to overtake Britain and become the dominant empire that we know it to be today. But those who have been following America's growth over the recent decade will see that it's starting to slow down, and countries such as China and India are catching up. If we take a look at the growth of these countries, we see that India and China are miles ahead of the USA. The USA has had an average GDP growth rate of around 2%, whereas China and India are growing about 3 times faster. India's average is around 6% and China's 7%. This brings us to the question, is this the start of the end for the US empire and the beginning of a Chinese one? So what made America's economy so great, and why is it the current economic superpower of the world? How does a country with less than 5% of the world's population generate and earn more than 20% of the world's total income? The USA's economy has a few key areas that makes it up. Number 1 is finance, insurance, and real estate. This makes up 22.3% of the entire economy's GDP. This comes from areas like the banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, etc. It comes from insurance companies like Warren Buffett's Geico, United Healthcare, and Cigna. This area is so big and important to the USA, it's one of the reasons why they couldn't let the banks go bust in the 2008 housing collapse. The whole system could have folded. The next largest sector of the USA's economy is professional and business services, making up 12.8% in total. This comes from the lawyers, the accountants, Amazon's web services, Facebook with their advertising, huge sector. The government, of course, contributes as well. You've got things like healthcare with Medicare and Medicaid. You've got pensions and welfare being handed out, money towards education and defense. These all contribute towards total GDP. Manufacturing accounts for 10.8% of USA's total economy. Everything that's sold on Amazon that has to be manufactured, the shoes, the phones, the appliances, the makeup. USA has a strong manufacturing industry, but nowhere near the likes of China. China accounted for 28.7% of the world's global manufacturing output, worth $4 trillion. The USA is the second largest, but still much below China at 16.8%. So the USA is 10% above Japan, and China is 10% above the USA. Where America does have the major advantage over China is technology, and that is technology already spread throughout the world. Think about Apple and all of the avid consumers they have in most countries. Huawei from China has the same, but nowhere near to the extent of Apple, or the quality. Facebook is a global technology company with roughly 2.85 billion monthly active users. It's the same with Twitter and Instagram. All of those global platforms are American. China has their own social media in the form of WeChat and Sina Weibo, but these are not global. They're purely Chinese. On the other hand, they are growing their global presence now through TikTok, which is Chinese owned. This is a huge positive for China's influence and power around the world. But if you sum it all up, the technology, the manufacturing, the finance, the insurance, the business services, etc., China are increasing at a faster rate than the USA. As we said earlier, it's around a 2% average growth for America, 7% for China. And it's because of this growth why economists are predicting China to overtake the USA and become the world's biggest economy by 2028. That's quite soon. The Center of Economics and Business Research said that after the pandemic, it's now expected that the value of the Chinese economy when measured in dollars is predicted to exceed that of the USA by 2028, half a decade sooner than it was expected a year ago. Because in the pandemic, China was able to come away from it a lot better than the States. The USA contracted 3.5% last year, the largest decline since just after World War II. Then we take a look at the Chinese economy in 2020, and that actually increased. China had GDP growth of 2.3%, going from 14.3 trillion to 14.7 trillion, despite all of the lockdowns and business closures from the pandemic. America had unemployment dramatically spike from the pandemic from 3.5% to 14.7%, and it took a year to get back down to 6.7%. That settled at almost double the original unemployment rate. China's unemployment increased a mere 1% from 5.2 to 6.2%. It's fair to say the USA was hit harder economically compared to China. But this is a short-term thing. The most important thing we can look at are the long-term trends. And if you look at China, they have 1.4 billion people. The USA has 330 million. That's 1/4 of the size, 1/4 of the manpower. So long term, it's really hard for the USA to keep up with China's growth purely from a population working standpoint. It's for this reason why Elon Musk says the Chinese economy will surpass the US by 2 or 3 times the amount. He said, the foundation of war is economics. If you have half the resources of the counterparty, then you better be real innovative. If you're not innovative, you're going to lose. It would only require getting to a GDP per capita half the size of the United States for their economy to be twice the size of ours. That is China's massive advantage. They can be 25% less efficient per person at producing goods and still beat the USA. So if China can continue to bring their poor and middle class up the ladder, they'll overtake the USA very quickly. As you can see, over the past decade, they've been growing the poor class into the middle class into the upper middle class, and the upper middle class into the wealthy. But they still have big amounts of people in the poor and middle class, aka they have much more room to grow. Whereas if this was the USA, pretty much everyone would already be in the upper middle class or the affluent. Even if you're on the unemployment benefit in the States, you get around 20k, which would fit into middle class with this graph. So China have more room for growth compared to America. America's more mature, they've been dominating for 100 years, they have a lot of wealthy, but China are on the move. It's for some of these reasons that we've talked about why investors like Ray Dalio are seeing a shift in the global economy from the USA to China. Dalio's got a couple of key explanations why he thinks this is the case. If we go to his website, which is called Principles, he's written in detail on the changing world order, a study that goes over the past leading empires, how they failed, and how he's seen similar patterns today. He said, I believe that the times ahead will be radically different from the times we have experienced so far in our lifetimes, though similar to many other times in history. Dalio explains 3 key phases in the rise and the fall of an empire: the ascent phase, the top, and then the decline. We're going to focus on the top and the decline phase because a lot of this relates to what is happening in the USA today. So some of the characteristics of the top and the decline phases are: 1. Prosperous periods lead to people earning more, which naturally leads to them becoming more expensive, which naturally makes them less competitive relative to those in countries where people are willing to work for less. AKA, this is what's happening in the US relative to China. China can work for a cheaper price and therefore create products less expensive. This results in more people buying from China instead of the US and China becoming richer. 2. Those who are most successful typically have their ways of being more successful copied by emerging competitors. This is what China has done. America had Tesla, they created Neo. America had Facebook and YouTube, China created Sina Weibo and Yokoturu. 3. The leading country extends the empire to the point that the empire has become uneconomical to support and defend, as the cost of maintaining it become greater than the revenue that it brings in. This is what we see in America. The last time they brought in a surplus instead of a deficit was 2001. 4. In the decline phase now, when debts become very large, when the central banks lose their ability to stimulate debt and economic growth, and when there is an economic downturn, that leads to debt and economic problems and to more printing of money, which eventually devalues it. This is what we've recently been seeing over the past year. We already had a big debt pile, 23 trillion at the start of 2020, and then we got hit with a pandemic, resulting in economic trouble, and we started to print money by the bucket load. We printed around 9 trillion US dollars in 2020 alone, almost 1/5 of the entire USA currency. This, of course, devalues it. These are all signals of a top and the decline phase of an empire, and so many of them seem to be occurring in the USA today. Even the long-term debt cycle that started in 1945, it generally lasts around 50 to 75 years, that may be winding to a close. 75 years from 1945 is 2020. So you've got a lot of these hints that are showing a slowdown in the US economy and the nation as a whole. Then you take a look at China, the second leading power, and they're doing the opposite, expanding like mad. From this, we can say only one thing. America have to make changes in order to keep the empire that generations have built.